All right, guys. I haven't done an interview in a while on the final score. And to say I'm excited about this guy coming on the show tonight is an understatement. Back in the 80s, one of the main reasons I watched Channel 5, and anybody knows, if you ever heard Tom Suter say Jelly Roll, you knew Jay Jennings was coming on. But what you guys, if you know me, you know I do a little bit of videography, and this guy right here is the main reason that I did videography. I got into it. With me to now is the legendary WRAL figure, Mr. Jay Jennings. Welcome to the show, Mr. Jennings.
Stevie, thank you. Thank you. Your intro is way too kind. And I just want to know, when it comes to your videography career, are you giving me credit or are you blaming me? I want to make sure.
Well, that depends on what people think of it, but I have had a few compliments. You're all right. You're all right.
Oh, well, good. But you're very kind. Thank you very much.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for coming on. Like I said, we've been trying to get this together for a little while, and COVID struck its head on me, and we couldn't get it going, but now we got it going. So first of all, you grew up in Missouri. Were you a sports fan, and who did you pull for if you were a sports fan out in Missouri?
Absolutely a sports fan growing up. Baseball fan, a St. Louis football Cardinals fan, because remember the Cardinals were in St. Louis before they moved to Arizona. My parents and grandparents had season tickets the whole time they were in town, so went to a ton of those games. St. Louis Blues, hockey, and then University of Missouri was I ended up going to school there, went to a bunch of games. My parents and grandparents are alums of the University of Missouri, and now my son went to the University of Missouri. So that was my background. So here's the deal. I go to University of Missouri to their journalism school, and I go there because I want to be a sportscaster. I want to be around it. I realized pretty quickly I'm not big enough, not fast enough, don't jump high enough, don't throw it hard enough, or any of those things to be able to play baseball, football, basketball, whatever. And but I want to be around the game, so I decide I've got this figured. I'm going to game the system. I'm going to go to journalism school and be a sports journalist. There aren't any of those out there, and that's how I'm going to do this. And then I get to the University of Missouri, and there were about 100 to 200 other folks who had the same brilliant idea. And then I got there and figured out, when it comes to being on the air, being the Tom Suter, Bob Holliday, Jeff Gravely on camera part, I wasn't very good. I wasn't very good at all. And so I fell in love with the videography side, the photography side, and that's the path that led me eventually to WRAL.
Now, talk a little bit about how did WRAL come into picture? North Carolina, Missouri. How did that happen?
Okay, so as an ACC sports fan, you know the name Mike Hogwood.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
legendary.
So Mike, it's a long way around to get this. The bottom line is, I did a freelance video assignment, one for 4 or 5 days in Kansas City at the Royals. The Royals were playing a series. Mike Hogwood was working at a little station in Fort Myers, Florida. The Royals trained in Fort Myers. Mike would come up every year to do feature stories on the Royals because they had a big fan base of Royals fans in Fort Myers. And he needed somebody to run a camera for him. Somehow he got my name. I went over, spent a few days with him, got to know Mike. And he was one of the first people outside of the Missouri alumni connections that I got to know who was actually in the business, in the broadcasting business. And so we maintained a friendship. So it's graduation time. I'm leaving school. I'm looking for a job. So I send my resumes out. I get word. I get an inquiry from WRAL from one of my resumes, they're in North Carolina. I've never heard of this place. I didn't, I wasn't sure if Raleigh was, I knew Raleigh was where Barney went to party. I knew that's where he used to go to the YMCA. But I wasn't sure if it had a hyphen in it with Durham. I didn't know anything. So I called Mike because I knew Mike grew up in North Carolina. And so I had two or three kind of semi offers on the table. And I remember Mike telling me, whatever you do, you want to work at WRAL. He said, it's in the heart of the ACC. It's right across the street from NC State. And this is in 1980. So they've got a national champion. They just hung a banner just 6 years ago.
Right.
In 1974 with David Thompson. And he says, put all the chips on WRAL and go for that. You will not be sorry. And I am very grateful to this day to Mike. I wouldn't be at WRAL if it wasn't for Mike Ogwood.
Right. What was your first impression? You didn't know about Raleigh. What was your first impression when you got to Raleigh?
Well, I'll tell you. I did a lot of research once Mike told me that. So the sports department at the time was Rich Brenner was the sports director. Tom Suter was doing weekends. And that was it. That was the entire sports department whenever I came to town. And that day on my job interview, when I flew out, Rich and Tom took me to a Duke State basketball game at Reynolds Coliseum in February.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You think I'm turning the job down now?
No, I wouldn't have.
And as a matter of fact, so this is a Duke team that's got Jaminski still playing, Gene Banks, Kenny Denard, Vince Taylor. It's a really good team. They got up on state. And so let me think, this would have been the 80 season. So this was Wittenberg and Sidney Lowe and Thurl's freshman year. Hawkeye Whitney was a senior. And Duke got a huge lead. When we got there, I think Duke was up in the first 3-4 minutes. They were up by like 14, 15 points. And next thing you know, second half, State goes on the shooting line. Reynolds is just rocking like Reynolds would rock. And I was like, oh yeah, I could see me right down over there in the corner. We were up in the crow's nest, and I could just picture me down there in the end zone on the baseline. And little did I know what I would witness on that baseline and the other baselines over the coming years.
Oh yeah, you definitely had a great job to have around that time, especially. You talked about Tom Suter.
Yep.
What was it like working with Tom Suter?
Well, Stevie, you'll love this story. I probably hadn't been at the station a week when Tom pulled me aside and said, you seem like, and so this is like March 1980, okay? A previous millennium. We're talking, 41 years ago. And Tom says, you seem like a nice young man. And I was 21 years old at the time. He said, I'm not going to be around here very much longer. As soon as I get my profit sharing, I'm going to retire. I'm going to get out of here. Well, we see how that worked out, don't we?
Yeah, that didn't happen.
Working with Tom, or back to your question, but working with Tom is fantastic. I, especially in those early years, because again, when I started, Tom was the weekend sportscaster, which meant for 3 to 4 days a week, he was going out and doing stories with me. That's who I worked with most every day. We would, whether it was, we'd go down to the Campbell basketball camp, and you'd interview, Press Maravich and any ACC star who was anybody at the time would be the Ralph Sampson, Hawkeye Whitney, Mike Jaminski, any of those guys were there. So we did a bunch of those. We did a bunch of a ton of ACC baseball, ACC basketball, ACC football, a lot of NASCAR in the early days. Tom and I did so many. We did qualifying. I lost count of the number of times we would go. We'd go cover qualifying. We used to charter a small plane to fly to Darlington to cover qualifying at Darlington. We'd landed a little grass strip outside of turn 3, and it was owned by a mom, this old man and old woman named Mr. and Ms. Moore. And Ms. Moore would load us up in the back of her station wagon and drive us over to the press gate and pick us up after qualifying was over. So Tom and I did stuff like that all the time. And it was just, it was fantastic. It was just so many wonderful adventures.
Yeah, there was nothing like Channel 5 sports, especially back then. Jeff Gravely. Now, he came on a little bit later, but what was it like working with him?
Digger was something else. So here's this is one of my, and Jeff's told this story too. So I was at work one day, and so and I get a call from some kid going to NC State who told me he wanted to be a sportscaster. He wanted to be a sports photographer, and he had just quit playing baseball at State and decided that sports photography, sports videography was what he wanted to do, and could he come talk to me? Well, it was Jeff. And so Jeff comes over, and I remember the day just like it was yesterday, sitting in the conference room at the TV station and talking to him, and just how bright and what a sponge he was, and how much at the time he's probably 21 years old. How much ACC history he knew, and he's a coach's son. So he also knows the game. He knows the ins and outs of every game. He doesn't just know the scores and the history. He knows why, the plays that get it done, why it was, game situations and all that sort of stuff. Well, we end up hiring Jeff as an intern in the sports department as a result of our meeting together. And then later on, a lot of people don't know this, but Jeff once he became a full-time employee at the TV station, he didn't start in the sports department. Jeff was a news photographer for probably less than a year, but he was a news photographer, going out and shooting car wrecks in the legislature and all that sort of stuff.
All that boring stuff.
Just doing what news photographers do. And so there was a little trickle down. I was offered the job as the chief photographer of the newsroom. And so part of that, the little game of checkers we played was, well, if you're going to take that, then Jeff really wants to be, he's really good at the news thing, but boy, he's going to be great doing sports. So that's when we hired Jeff to be the sports photographer. And so that's what led us down that path. I think at the time so that made the sports department Bob Holliday, Jeff Gravely, Rick Sullivan, and then I would come in and help out on the weekends. So that was a great team to be with. I mean, you talk about a team. That was a team with a capital T.
Yeah, I actually watched another thing. I spent all day pretty much watching a lot of those videos. was Stuart Scott at ESPN showing the football game where he got Gravely, and Gravely claimed he was out of bounds, and then that was so great to see Stuart Scott up there again.
Stu's fantastic. He wasn't there that long, but it was pretty. His talent was pretty evident. I mean, when here's the deal. He came there with the idea of, I want to get in the WRAL sports department, but no openings ever popped up while I was there. And so eventually he got a job in Orlando with some friends of ours who actually used to be at WRAL, who hired him down there, and who John Harris was his name, or it still is his name, as a matter of fact. And John's the first one who actually put Stuart on the air, as far as I know, as a sportscaster in a major market. And golly, I mean, just as we talk about in sports, a generational talent. Stu was a generational talent when it came to sportscasting. I mean, he changed it. He was one of those 2 or 3 guys at the mothership at Bristol at ESPN who changed sportscasting for everybody.
Yeah,
And let me just say this. The best guy, the absolute best guy. A quick story on that. When my son was getting ready to go to college, Jason asked me, he said, so Stewart was already at Bristol, already at ESPN, and, was already one of the top guys there. And Jason asked me, he said, Dad, do you think Stewart would ever let me come give us a tour of the studios at Bristol? So I could always ask. And so I got up with him and reached out to him, and he said, oh, absolutely. So we booked this whole trip to New England. We built it around Red Sox games and the Basketball Hall of Fame, the baseball, all of this stuff. And we called it Operation Booyah, of course. And so Stewart was co-anchoring the 11 o'clock Sports Center with Dan Patrick that night. And he said, come to studios I think it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he said, just come on by. And so he showed us around, gave us the big tour, and then proceeded to let Jason be an active part in writing his scripts that night for the Sports Center.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember Jason wrote there was a script that had to do with Keyshawn Johnson that he wrote, and a couple others. And it was just, and then, at the end of the show, he takes the big stack of scripts, autographs them for him, and hands it to him. It was fantastic. It was fantastic.
Wow, what a guy.
And I just, he was, I wish I'd had more contact with Stewart over his ESPN years. We'd always hook up whenever he came to town. At least, he'd come to a lot of times he'd come to the TV station when he was doing, Late Night with Roy or something like that. So he'd always swing by and say hello to the old crew. And man, I love that guy. He's the best. He still is the best.
Yes, sir. Now, one of the things you were a part of that got a big tradition started still to this day, Football Friday. Now, when I was playing, we were at a small school, so we didn't get, nobody. We actually did have Channel 5 come. Suter came down one year, 1986. We had the extra effort award winner, J.D. Daniels, and if when I saw Sky 5, I wasn't a varsity player. I was a JV player then. But we had a game that day, so we were in our uniforms, and here he comes down there. And
nice.
They had us on the air. I actually have that on YouTube. And man, I was looking at Tom Suter like, oh my gosh, it's really him. But Football Friday, that was after we played, we made sure we stayed up Friday night and caught up that just started out as part of the sportscast. Then it became so big that it actually became a bit its own show. What was it like how hectic was it for you guys to go around to cover all these games?
It was pretty hectic, and but I think we loved it. I know we absolutely loved it. So here's kind of the inside scoop, and I think some of the folks have probably figured this out. You could take the number of games that we had on the air, divide it by 2, and that's how many crews, how many cameras we sent out to the different games. So, Tom was always trying to push we need 30 games. Well, you got to find 15 cameras and 15 people to run them.
Yeah.
Occasionally we'd have somebody who could do 3 games. I did 3 games on several occasions. But it was fun. And, one of the things I loved about it, Stevie, was, and I'm not saying that covering college sports and pro sports isn't fun and people don't appreciate you being there. But there's something about whether it's a Hal Stewart or a Gary Fowler or a Bobby Poss or a any one of these guys, Ken Browning, you name them, turning to you during the game on the sidelines and saying, thanks for coming. We really do appreciate you being here. That, that's fantastic. And then there's a lot of the guys you run into, like the Bernie Caps. Bernie was the manager, the equipment manager and trainer at Rocky Mount High for years and years, who always greeted you with a cup of Sundrop on the sidelines and a program to make sure you had the number. So it was just, it was fantastic. And then of course there's the adrenaline of covering a great game and hustling back to the game. Because back in those days, now we've got all the technology where, a guy can, somebody can cover a game, and they get to a Wi-Fi signal, they get to an internet signal, they can just do it on their laptop and send it back. And back in the day, man, I had a video cassette in my hand. I had to hustle my tail back, down 64 or back up 40 or something, and slam it in edit bay and try to get it done by, back sometimes 11:15, because it used to go on 11:15, then eventually 11:30. So there's that adrenaline, and then one of the things that was always cool, especially once it grew and the crews got bigger, there were more and more people, is that you get back, and now it's like you want to hear, you heard on the radio or on the two-way radio that somebody had a great game, they had some 54-52 shootout. You want to get the story from them, but you got to edit your story, and but there was a lot of that kind of excited to hear what everybody else saw. And one of the things is I found out just a few years ago, Ryan McGee of ESPN, we reconnected. Ryan and I have known each other for a while, but I found I never could remember how Ryan and I got to know each other. We got to know each other because he used to help on Football Friday.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
While you're on the subject of doing the editing stuff, I was watching the behind the scenes with you. They had the behind the scenes video where you went to a state game. How, I've got to ask you, it's just amazing. How did you come up with clips in that short of time? Because I mean, a lot of times when they used to have the Channel 5, used to have the Holly Farms or the Jefferson Pilot game of the week, it would be over like 10:30, 11 o'clock. And how did you go about getting the clips that quick? So there's a couple things that we did a little. The thing that you watched was a little bit, I don't want to say it wasn't fictionalized. That's not right. Was kind of telescoped. Normally, I would say 99 times out of 100, if I was going to do a photo essay, a video montage with music, I shoot the game one day and it's on the air. Shoot the game one day and I edit it on another. Sometimes like during football season, I'm shooting it on a Saturday and editing on a Monday. Or if it's an ACC weeknight game, let's say it's Wednesday night and it runs on Thursday at 6 o'clock. So I would spend the full day. So normally they were a long 8 to 10 hour edit of putting that stuff to music. And because what I would do is I wish I had a good enough memory to do this where I could go, oh, there's a shot. I've got that shot of Jimmy Valvano jumping up and down. I want to put it with a Thurl Bailey dunk over here and go with that shot of the guy in the end zone, jumping up and down with the sign. But I can remember some of that, but boy, you shoot so much stuff. So what I do is the first part of that edit process, you're not editing at all. I would get out a legal pad and I'm scanning through the video and I'm making notes of the shots I've got. So I would spend probably an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours just logging the video before I would ever start editing. Because to me, if I don't know what I have, then I can't edit it. Then I'm just guessing. Because, or then you go, oh, I forgot all about that shot that I had of the, that great dunk by Worthy in the second half. I forgot all about it. So I learned to log and write it all down. And that's how I did it. It wasn't immediate. Now the stories that I would do with Tom or Bob or Jeff or myself, it's like an 8 o'clock tip, game over at 10:15, and we're having to do a story at 11 o'clock. Yeah, those were, we would slam out a lot of those, and that's, but usually when we did that, not always, usually we would have, it's two people. One's the photographer, editor, one's doing the writing. But we do a lot of those even today, where it's one person is
now we used to call them one-man bands. We now call them multimedia journalists. That's the name for one person who does it all.
So you got to cover some, I mean, great sports figures, ACC basketball back then, Michael Jordan, James Worthy, but how do I say this? What was the feeling like when you started covering that '83 NC State team? I'm a Carolina fan, but I can tell you, you're doing the Hunger Like the Wolf video and having them beating Carolina. I was like, that would make me a State fan right there, just watching. But what was it like? What was it like covering that team?
Well, so there's some Carolina background to that. One is the fact that, I got here in '80. And so we really didn't have, in 1980, in the NCAA tournament, we only had one team go very far, and that was Duke. And I didn't go on that trip. Tom Suter was covering Duke at the time. So he went to Lexington, and that's where they ended up losing to Purdue and Joe Barry Carroll, I think in the regional final. But I only covered a couple of NCAA tournament games in Greensboro, and State lost early. And Carolina, if I remember right, they lost, I think in Texas, maybe to Texas A&M early in the tournament. Anyway, so the background is the next year, '81, Carolina goes to the Final Four in Philadelphia, and so I covered that. That was my first Final Four. Was my second year at WRAL,
and everything going on.
And then, and then so the next year in '82, now Bob Holliday has started at Channel 5, and Bob and I go to the Final Four in New Orleans for and everybody knows what happens there. Michael was 17 seconds draining the jumper over Georgetown. So I'm kind of liking this Final Four thing, man. It's kind of, I'm kind of down with it. So the next year, if I remember right, obviously State goes and Carolina goes. And so they tell Tom goes with Carolina in '83, and I go with. They tell me go with State. You're going to go to Corvallis, Oregon. I'm like, where is Corvallis, Oregon? I go out there after covering all the games in the ACC tournament, which were, as you know, in '83, all ridiculous. That all the State's wins there were just crazy.
Yeah,
last minute wins. Having to beat. Had to come back and beat Wake, who they just beat by like 30 4 days before, and then defeat Carolina, who they'd not beat. Well, they just beaten toward the end of the regular season, but so Carolina was out for revenge, and then Big Ralph in the ACC tournament final. So all right. All that to say, I go to Corvallis with the orders. Get this, with the orders of pack for a long trip, because after State loses to UNLV, you're going to fly out to Syracuse to be with Tom and to cover Carolina, because Carolina's going to the Final Four. That was my orders. So I'm out there in Corvallis, and there's nobody there. I mean, as far as North Carolina media, there's maybe 4 of us, 5 of us, guy from the News and Observer, guy from the Raleigh Times. I think Don Shea from Channel 11 was there eventually, but there was like nobody there. And we're staying at the same hotel in Corvallis at State, and so they just keep winning. They just keep winning, and understand. So this is '83. So I am 24 years old. So, and that's a senior laden team. So, I mean, I'm basically the same age as as the seniors on the team. And one of the things that happens after they win the first 2 games, they go to Ogden, Utah for the regionals. Again, I'm staying in the same hotel. I believe it was Thurl. I think Thurl was rooming with Witt. I think that's Derek Wittenberg, and they invited me to come up their room to watch a movie. And so I could just remember this. I just felt like this is ridiculous. I mean, I'm watching movies with these guys, and they're and so, and then they win again, and then they beat Virginia again, and now it's time to go to Albuquerque. Now, Bob, I finally get to go home. I hadn't gone home from the time I went from Corvallis through the end of the Ogden Regional. I hadn't been home in 2 weeks. So, I finally get to come home, throw a little bit of laundry and, at my wife. By the way, just to let you know that both of our kids, I have two children, both of my kids were born in the month of March. So I always say at our house, March Madness means that my wife was mad at me most of the month because I was gone for all the birthday parties. Yeah, we can laugh about that today. But anyway, so Bob and I go to Albuquerque, and it was just it's hard to believe. It's just hard to believe how what we were witness to. I mean, the one thing I remember, there's a lot of things I remember, but I have a distinct memory of during the championship game, we had one seat on press row. So that was Bob's. Bob would sit on press row, and I would be back in this auxiliary gym on the far side, or the outside the pit, because that was the name of what they call the University of Mexico Arena. That's where they had the rest of the media, where we would watch and record the games there, because you can't shoot in the NCAA tournament game because of rights issues. So I'm back there recording the game, and Bob comes back at halftime and says, "You want to come out and watch the first part of the first half of the second half?" Oh, absolutely. And so the thing was, I stay out there until about the 10-minute mark, and then we swap. And well, I go back out for the first. I'm out there to start the second half. Houston goes on this ridiculous run. I think they go on like a 12 to 14 point run, and State is just wobbling big time. Coach V calls a timeout. I think we don't even get to the 16-minute timeout. And well, I'm not a superstitious guy, but I knew I had to get the heck out of there and get Bob back in that seat. And the funny thing is, Bob knew the same thing. I met him in the hallway. We were on a dead sprint passing each other, and we just passed each other our press passes back and forth so he could get back on his seat on press row. So if you want to know what the key to State winning in '83, it was Bob. We got Bob back in the seat on press row at the pit.
The switch. Bob Holliday was the good luck charm.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Then you started with the Hungry Like the Wolf. I mean, that was going on during the ACC tournament after they beat Carolina. What gave you the idea to do the Hungry Like the Wolf song with them? I mean, it's obvious, but
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it was the song actually kind of got popular, if I remember right, sometime after the first of the year, like early '83, like mid-January '83. And so I kept thinking, oh, if I get the right game, and so that's what I would do in those days. I love music, so I would listen for a song, and then it's like, oh yeah, well you got to do something with State, and it's such a driving tune from Duran, and so the piece I used it for was the second of the State Carolina games at the second one, which was at Reynolds Coliseum, middle of February, and that was when Whip was still on the mend with his broken foot, so that's the one I used it for, and then we just kept revisiting it. The station would rerun that occasionally during the run, and we re-edited it a couple times, and then I did it a couple, like you saw, we did it a couple years later. But it was just that was kind of like, I would have been. It's not how did I come up with it? How did I not mess it up? Because if that's one of those, if you don't do it, you're a fool.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. See, when I started doing my videography, I would hear a song, and I'm like you. I love music. I mean, sports and music is like that, because I do a music podcast too. But when I hear a song and I'm like, that's that's got to go to something, you know, just like, I mean, the Rocky music is one thing that's so
right.
obvious.
Yeah. But one of the other, the other thing too is, one is I'm listening for lyrics. Do the lyrics fit? If the lyrics, if there are lyrics that don't fit, can I, because I love music, because the song, when I edit it, it has to make musical sense. You have to make your edits where somebody doesn't go, oh my gosh, he just chopped the living daylights. Where he messed up that song. And so it's got to make musical sense to me. So there's that. There's songs with lyrics. Do the lyrics make sense? Are they? Can you apply them? Like I remember once doing one. Duke had a quarterback named Anthony Dilwig back in the late '80s, who kind of jumped on the scene out of nowhere with when Spurrier was the coach there, and In Excess had the song "New Sensation," and I thought, oh my God, that's perfect for that.
Yeah.
And so, that's an example of listening for a song. But then, there are other times there's just, it's just a cool stinking song, man. I have to use ZZ Top LaGrange somehow, some way, somewhere. I had that song in my hip pocket for probably 10 years before I found an excuse to use it.
Well, another thing we got to talk about too, and this came up every year. My mom and my grandma would love it. Start a football season. Yeah, Andy Griffith, what it was football. Oh my! When that would come on, they were couldn't say nothing, and they loved that edit of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So if I remember right, the original version of that, and I had kind of, not growing up around here. Obviously, I knew who Andy was. I mean, we were in my house. We were big watchers of the Andy Griffith Show growing up, even though that was a national sensation. When that show was on the air. I don't think I realized until I got here just what an icon Andy is in our state. And then, so I think if I remember right, I was kind of sort of familiar with some of his comedy monologues that he did. But I remember you would go to, if you're a Carolina, if you went to a Carolina game in the early 80s, one of the things they would do is pregame, they would play that over the PA system before the game. And that's where I first started hearing it. And I think it was Tom Suter said, he was one of the ones who suggested that I do that as a montage, do it as a photo essay. And the first time I did it was at a State Carolina football game at Carter Finley. So I'm trying to think, 81, 82, I think it was 83 would have been the season. Because I think Tom Reed was still the coach. And Dick Crum was at Carolina. And so that was the first one. And then I don't know where we came up with the idea. I think we were just kind of kicking around what we want to do to kick off football season the next year. And I don't know who said it, but maybe I said, why don't I just take what it was with football and make it an all ACC East Carolina thing. And then, so we started doing that every year. And so every year I put kind of fresh video in certain places, and it was always fun to do. It was just a hoot.
Yeah. One thing that never changed though was the referee at the end stepping in something, falling down. Yeah. That never changed. That was always the same. Cause I always watched for that.
No, never did.
Yeah. That
never
was
did.
Great.
No. And the thing about it was that referee falling down was from the very first one, from that state.
You can tell.
The state Carolina. That happened in that very first one. So that's why it never changed. I never found a better shot because it looked like he stepped in something.
So you started doing like documentaries too. One of them was Take Me Out to the Bulls game, the Durham Bulls. What was it like working with the Durham Bulls? So I mean that documentary is great, by the way. Awesome documentary. But
Thank you.
How did that come about?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm Stevie. I'm sorry.
Now, how did that come about?
All right. So, so this was what? Is it like 6 years ago now? Something like that. We were, Jim Goodman, who's, at the time was the president and CEO of our company. Jim loves technology. He's always about, we got to try something new. We got to find the new technology and be the first to be in it. Just like Sky 5 was the first, LiveStar 5 was the first satellite truck. We had the first tall tower in North Carolina. We were first to HD. We're the first HD station in the country. So in the same way, he came in and said, you know what? We want to be the first station to do 4K. And so he worked it out with our engineering folks and some of the folks with Sony and Fujinon, and to where we could, because you have to do 4K, you have to have a different camera, different lenses, and everything. And he said, let's find something that will showcase the high resolution and the high dynamic range, the high deep rich color of 4K. And we wanted something that would obviously look great, but also where we would have lots of access and a lot of control. And so, as most of you folks will know, the Durham Bulls are a division of Capital Broadcasting. And so we approached, our sister company, the Durham Bulls, about the possibility of doing this, and they were like, "Oh man, bring it on! What do you want to do?" And I mean, they even opened up a big part of their office to us. We set up we made it basically our broadcast headquarters for the week. We had we were there for a 4-game series with Charlotte. And just had a great time. It was fantastic. And we decided what we want to do was just, for those who haven't seen it, it's what's it like to go to a Durham Bulls game, both as a fan and behind the scenes. Behind the scenes as the team, behind the scenes and doing concessions, behind the scenes doing the production as far as the video wall and all of that, and Woolly Bull, grounds crew, the whole deal. What's it like? And so that's what we did. And we made the decision that the documentary wouldn't have a narrator. So we basically used Patrick Keenis's voice as the play-by-play guy. He's kind of using the thread of the game, of his calls of the game to get us through. And I'm a baseball junkie. I could, it was fun spending, 4 days at the ballpark. Sadly, we had a rain out in there, so it turned out to only be 3 games. But and we had one game where we went over and just kind of watched and went behind the scenes ourselves just to see ourselves what was going on before we shot it. But we just had a fantastic time. It was great.
Yeah,
I'd do that in a heartbeat.
Not only though did you do sports stuff, but just talk a little bit about the other stuff you did. Go to Russia in 1992. What was that like?
It was life-changing, man. It was like nothing I'd ever dreamed of doing. So, crank up the flux capacitor. Let's go back to really the fall of 91. We're talking the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, the Soviet Union is collapsing during the end of like the late fall, early winter of 91. And I get this call from my boss, the news director, who says, we want you to, you're going to Russia. You're going to Moscow at the end of January. And Donna Gregory, one of our just outstanding anchors, is going to go with you. And it's like, what are we going to do? And they said, you're going to live with a family for a week. You're not going to stay in a hotel. You're going to live with a family for a week. So in essence, and this trip was all scheduled prior to the fall of the Soviet Union. So we're trying to make preps to go. We don't even know what we can take. We don't know what customs will be like. We don't know what going through the border, landing at the airport, what that's going to be like, because there's a whole new government. And, how much will it be like the Soviet Union? How much will it be like Western Europe? We didn't have a clue, but it was, and, oh yeah, it's January in Moscow,
Coldest.
which has the same latitude. It has the same latitude, I think, as Fairbanks, Alaska. So I mean, most of the time there, it was about 5 to 10 degrees. It really warmed up to the high 20s one day. But it was fantastic. Donna lived with one family and I lived with another. I still communicate with my host, Vladimir Kozlov. We still communicate. I'm friends with 2 of his daughters on Facebook. How the world has changed. But I remember, Stevie, thinking the first night we got there, it was a long day of travel to get there, and it was hard communicating with the first couple of days because the language barrier was really, really thick. I will say this: his English was way better than my Russian. And so, but in a very broken way, Vladimir asked that first night, says, "Do you want to go to Red Square?" "Oh, yes, I do." And so we took subway, buses, and all that sort of stuff to get from his apartment building down to the center of Moscow to Red Square. And I just remember standing there, seeing that classic view of Red Square with the Kremlin on the other side, Vladimir Lenin's tomb here, St. Basil's Cathedral with the onion domes, the colorful onion domes off to your left. It's cold, a little bit of spit and snow. And I'm thinking, what is this country kid, small town boy from small town in Southeast Missouri? What are you doing in Russia just weeks after the Soviet Union has fallen? You can't make this stuff up. And, and I look back at the places I've been and the people that I've met. It's what a blessing the whole thing's been, man.
You have definitely had a fantastic career with some of the things you've done. I know one of your big thrills had to be, though, covering the state playoffs, the first round of state playoffs with your son, though. What was that like to be able to do that with covering it with Jason?
Well, it was great. We actually kicked around the idea a couple different years and just were never able to pull it off. And we just decided that year that was when it was going to happen. And now the thing about it is, it's not like I hadn't covered high school football with Jason before.
Right.
But a lot of times, because he started when he was doing it when he was like 6 or 7 years old. But this time he was, we talked about it and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it together, and we're going to tag team the highlights. You're going to, I'll do a line, you do a line, I'll do a line, you do a line. And it was as a dad, man, it doesn't get any better than that. It doesn't get any better than that. And I could not be prouder of him. I mean, he's way better than I am all the way around when it comes to television. And he's a great young man and a great dad and a great husband. I couldn't be prouder.
Yeah, I can tell he takes after his daddy. What were some of the things?
No, that's the good part. That's the good part. He doesn't take after me in a lot of ways.
Well, we'll talk a little bit. I mean, some of the other documentaries you did, the 75 Hours about Hurricane Florence, the Twist of Fate about the 1988 tornadoes. But what were some of the and all of the sports and this? What were your favorite things that you've worked on?
Oh man, you're gonna make me pick my favorite children, aren't you?
I know it's hard. I mean, if it's you don't have to pick this.
It's hard. I've been honored to do be part of some great projects. And really, Stevie, the way I've come to see my role is, especially when it comes to documentaries, but it really goes back to my days in sports, is really storyteller is what I am. And even back to the photo essay days, those were how can I tell this story the story of the game, do an honest rendition of the game using music and pictures and sound. And now in the world of documentaries, how can, we're doing these stories where people are, and a lot of times handing us these very precious things, these stories of their lives, and then taking them, telling them honestly, doing them the honor that they deserve, which is not overblowing them, but not underselling them as well, telling them as truthfully and straightforward, and stewarding these stories from the people who tell them to us, give them to us, to the viewer. There was one we did a couple years ago. There's several we've done that I'm really, really proud of. We did one called Searching for a Fix several years ago. It was about the opioid epidemic in our country. And that was an example of, boy, some people, families, people struggling with addiction, shared some really tender, delicate stories with us. And, and I think I hope we made some sort of a difference. I hope we raised some awareness, that people understood the scope and depth of the problem. That would be one. We've told a couple of stories about people who were wrongly convicted, only to get out, only to have their sentences not just overturned, but declared innocent. We did one on Greg Taylor called 6,149 Days. That was very challenging to work on. I'm really proud of that. And we did another one called now I can't remember the name of it, but it was about Joseph Sledge and his An Obvious Suspect was the name of that one. And he was wrongly convicted. He's actually spent like 37 years in prison for murders he didn't commit. And to me, those stories they're heartbreaking, but finally some justice is done. So there's lots of I've done over. I actually had to do a count the other day for somebody. I was kind of blown over. I've done over 100 documentaries since I've been at WRAL.
Wow. And all of them are great. I mean, I could sit here and watch them all day. Like I told you, I messaged you today and I was like, I'm watching your stuff right now, and what I could find up there, I was like, this just took me way back. My brother came to my house and I said, guess who I'm interviewing tonight? And he was like, who? And I said, Jay Jennings. He was like, DJ Jennings. And I was like, yeah, DJ Jennings. So, I mean, I've often wondered what you were up to. And look, I'm not going to keep you any longer. I know you're a big baseball fan. You're probably going to watch some baseball tonight. But look, thank you so much for.
There's a chance of that. Oh, Stevie, thank you very much. I mean, it's always fun to. It's always fun to go down memory lane, and and let me tell you just real quick. Like I think one thing I'd like to get across is I don't know how many times I've even told the story. Where did the whole video montage thing come from? I had a friend of mine when I was at the University of Missouri. I met a guy named Chris Lee, and Chris was the chief photographer at KOCO in Oklahoma City, and he was coming up to University of Missouri to cover an OU football game. And he showed me this story that he had done of this montage of OU. He had done several to both OU and Oklahoma State football games, and I just thought they were mesmerizing. And this is, of course, remember now we're talking. This is the early days of MTV. So I'm thinking, wow, I can do music videos to sports. And so actually the first couple I did actually were music that I got from off those tapes that I edited to. So really Chris is I can't miss the fact that I got a lot of the inspiration in those early days. I just wanted, man, those are cool. I got to be able to, do that, and so as the old saying goes, I know a good idea when I steal one. So,
how hard was it
for that? And
how hard was it to get the music back then? Because you know, all you really had was cassette and vinyl back in the early '80s. Well, you know, it's just one thing with CDs.
Yeah.
How hard was it to get that music?
You know, I mean, you had to go to the record store and buy it. I mean, that was the, you know, and there were times when I wanted a song and either I couldn't find it or the record store didn't have it. It was sold out, you know, and it's not like I could go download it from, you know, Apple Music or Spotify. You know, that wasn't happening. So there were a handful of times that I just couldn't. So I, you know, that was the other thing. So you know, I talk about finding a song and hanging on to it. I would find a song by the 45 or the album, or sometimes, if you're really fortunate, there was an EP out there, you know, an extended play, full disc, and they would get, and sometimes, oh man, oh, you bet we are. That's because nobody else will go out with me. But you know, an EP with an instrumental version of the song, oh, that was like gold, man. That was like gold. So, you know, that was fun. I mean, I love music and love sports, and it was just, and you know, the other thing I don't want to miss here is there's a lot of stations who wouldn't have put up with this. You know, a lot of stations who, you know, had some 21, 22-year-old kid fresh out of college, wet behind the ears. You know, he comes to him saying, "Hey, let me do this. You know, let me take the highlights from the State Carolina game, and I'm going to whip you up something fantastic, I promise." And you know, most sports directors, news directors are going to look at you like, you just sit down and shut up, and you know, go at it, you know, go over here and do this interview, you know. And so I was really fortunate they gave me the opportunity to do them and do them over and over and over again, because honestly, there's a lot of time involved in doing one of those. It's not only shooting the game, but it's, you know, you're losing a full day for a minute 15, minute and a half, minute 45 story. So I'm grateful to the news directors and sports guys who let me take all that time and do those. And you know, you hit on something earlier too, Stevie, that covering, I was, you know, talking about blessed in timing, you know, to arrive in the early 80s and roll through all that I saw through about 2000 covering sports here. Holy moly, man. You know, two of the first things I covered when I got here were Mike Krzyzewski's opening news conference and Jim Valvano's opening news conference.
Wow. You were, especially from the 80s to the 90s, the mid-90s, that was, gosh, you know, you couldn't ask for anything better than covering ACC basketball.
Oh, yeah, you know, and just, you know, grateful that my family put up with me while I was gone all that time and working the long hours, because, you know, I loved it. And, you know, I did miss a lot at home. There's no question about that. So, but, you know, it's been, I wouldn't trade it. It's been a great run. And, you know.
Now, before I let you go, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I've interviewed a lot of the older state players, Corciani and you know, Monroe and Carolina, some of the Carolina players from that back then. And I've talked a little bit about, I know going to the bigger venues, they want to put their booties in the seat, get money. But don't you wish we still had like the Reynolds Coliseums and the Carmichaels?
Absolutely.
Reynolds, I'm going to tell you this, being a Carolina fan, Reynolds, I went in there one time and that place was so loud. I missed the days where they were right on the court, and it's like you give away an advantage for that team when you go to the bigger, because you had those students there, and the noise meter. I mean, I'm telling you, I know they got to get the money and all that, but those days, I miss those days.
Yeah. You know, I wish it didn't have to be either or. And, you know, I do appreciate the fact that State comes back and plays their heritage games at Reynolds. You know, and then occasionally Carolina has come back and played a game at Carmichael. But yeah, I miss those. I will say, I always said that for one game, for a big game of those three, Carmichael, Reynolds, and
Cameron.
Carmichael, Reynolds, and Cameron. Of course, Cameron. For one game, for the big game, I think Reynolds was the best. I think Reynolds was.
I will go along with that. I will say that.
Now, I will say this. Cameron, game to game to game to game is just, it's a ridiculous atmosphere. And the old days of Carmichael Auditorium, and I actually just had this conversation with Cullen Browder the other day because Cullen's a big Carolina fan. Carmichael, all three of them had a unique sound. Each one sounded different when you were down on the bass line. And there was something about Carmichael that just sounded like a jet engine was revving. It would just sounded like, that was just, you could just feel the RPMs rolling up, and maybe, who knows, maybe that was Jordan coming down the lane for all I know. But Carmichael had its own, and they listed it at 10,000. It was they probably were able to wedge about, I'm sure Dean had the fire marshal looking the other way because I'm sure Carmichael had way more than 10,000 in it. But all three were great, and I miss them. I miss
I miss the noise meter at Reynolds. I miss the paper scoreboard at Carmichael at the end because I always looked at that.
Yeah, when and you know why that was there at Carmichael?
The video
that was for Dean's game film.
Yeah,
that was for Dean's game film. So yep.
Who did I interview? I think it was Matt Doherty. I interviewed Matt Doherty, and I think he was telling me that was the purpose of that was for the game film. But
yep,
man, I could sit here.
So whenever they came to that end of the court,
he knew what time it was. Sir, I could sit here and talk to you all night about this stuff, but I know it's 10 after 8 now, so I'm gonna let you go. But thank you so much. Yeah, it feels like we haven't been talking about 20 minutes. But thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be able to talk to you and to share these memories.
Well, I'm honored that you asked, man. Honored that you asked, and I appreciate all the folks over the years who've just had so many kind of things to say. And I didn't grow up in North Carolina, but I got here as soon as I could.
Yeah, and you definitely one of us now. That's for sure. All right, guys, that's going to do it for tonight. Like I said, Mr. Jay Jennings, the legendary Jay Jennings. Hey, thank you so much. I can't tell you enough how much that meant to me.